So just to kind of walk you through it. So basically what we said, usually what you do is you start with an XML file. So I'm gonna click on the little A+, create a new layout. I'll call it timeline.xml. It's gonna be a linear layout. Bam, finish. There it is, right? I said world's simplest UI, right? So there's our UI, there's our large text, and then I'll put another. It doesn't really matter. You can put medium text, any kind of text. I couldn't care less about that. Then I said make this one take all the space, right? Bam, bam, done. And then make this one be centered. Bam, center, done. Okay. So we got the world's simplest UI, right? Piece of text here and piece of text here, right? This is going to be a title. This is going to be some output eventually. Save it. Now we would need a corresponding Java class, right? So right-click, new Java class, and I'll give you a name, timeline activity, right? To be consistent, you basically say extends activity, just like before, right? Organize the imports, and then the only method that we universally almost always care about is the onCreate, right? OnCreate, bam, done. And you put that infamous line 11. You can copy paste. This is basically hello world. You can copy paste it, right? I'm not doing anything new. Just that in hello world, this was already given to us. And now we just get to recreate it. But again, if you can copy paste it. So r.layout.timeline, right? And like I said before, whenever you create a new main building block, you got to register it. Okay, so that just means dropping in a one-liner here somewhere. You can just basically activity name dot timeline activity. That's it, you're done. And if you want to launch it, you would just put it in status data. We already have, oh, we don't have the button for it. All right, let's add a button for it first. Not preferences, but menu. Menu, and we add an item, right? And we call it item timeline. Give it some kind of title. Again, you can just quickly say new string. Timeline, bam, 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 save it. And then in status activity, we need to just launch it. So status activity is going to have that big case statement. So somewhere here you say case r.id.item timeline. You say something, do something and return true. And that doing something could be as simple as start activity for a new intent. This timeline activity dot class. That's it. So those are the files that I modified. Then you run it. You click on menu, look, there's timeline, and boom, there's our world's simplest UI. Right? So who got this? Okay, you guys need some time? So when you look at the XML file, this is really, I mean, like I said, you can pick a theme here, and like this doesn't really do anything. This is just more of a, you know, pretends to kind of give you an idea what it would look on the real device. But what theme you're really going to use really depends on what you applied. Yeah, yeah. And what we did in our main theme, we set theme.light. So for example, I could copy paste this and apply that theme. Oh, I applied it to application, so my entire application is going to be light. Yeah. And for and what I did also is in the status activity in the other. So if I look at layout, in the status layout, we applied style to a bunch of these properties, right? So if you look at it here, what we did is we applied title style to this one, and background blue to that one, right?
So it's like in CSS, whatever is, like you said, whatever is closer, we'll get, otherwise we just get to
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here I could do the same thing. Say this title is gonna have a style that. So then I can take out the gravity, I can take out the appearance, right? So I got style, and I think I'm gonna leave layout. Well, technically I can take out layout width and height as well. So layout width and height, and I'm not gonna need ID, so I'm simplifying it quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, and you want the background to be blue, just like we had in the other guy. I could copy paste that line and put it into my code as well. Something like that. So now it would look more blue-ish, right? Possibly not the best choice of colors, but whatever. Okay, so now that we have this world's simplest UI, right? I'm gonna close all. I really just wanted to have the new timeline activity where we can actually do some interesting stuff, right? This is now back at the level of Hello World, right? So wouldn't it be nice if we were able to read the data from the database and put it into that UI, right? I mean, that was the goal. That's our design. This is our back of a napkin design. That's what it says. Create this timeline. All right, we mostly got it. Now read the data and dump it into the screen. Because right now we can verify the data here by going into SQLite, right, which normal users can't, and we can verify the data here by going into logd, which normal user can't, right? So if I look at my timeline activity again. A couple of minor cosmetic things. I wanted to change the text here to actually be the text that says timeline. And then this text, it could actually be empty, right? I don't need any text here because this is going to be my output. So I'm going to yank out the property for text. However, I'm going to care about its ID because we're going to be presumably programmatically setting the value of this text, right? So I usually call this one text underscore out, or like as short for output. You can call it whatever you want. Right? So now in timeline activity, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do just like what we did on Monday. I'm gonna define text view text out. This is going to be our output. Control-Shift-O to organize imports, right? And then you locate it after what used to be your line 11, the one where you inflate the stuff. So I'm going to say text out is going to be text view. Find view by ID, r dot ID dot, and then you find your text out. And at this point we have our output. Now, how do we now find the how are we gonna get our data? Where does the data live? Well, data lives in a database, and what's our abstraction for the database? Status data. Yeah, cool. So status data has all these like methods to help us get the job done, and it's got this great method called insert, but there's no reading method, right? So what we should do is we should design another method that's gonna return the data. So that method is usually called, I'll call it query, and there's a reason why I'm gonna use that name, because later on it's gonna match some other names, namely content provider. So I'm gonna create public. Do we wanna return a list or an array? It doesn't really matter. Probably a list of status query. Organize imports, right? So query is gonna return a list, right? And we're gonna have list of status. List is gonna be a new array list status. Something like that. You guys are familiar with, you guys know what generics are and all that jazz, right? No? A quick overview. So when you say, you don't have to do this, look. Bam, 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 right? So up, you don't have to do this. So you can just say, I got a list, right? And that's fine. And then since it's a list of anything, it's really a list of objects, because object is the mother of everything in Java. Now, the problem with this is that you could like accidentally put the wrong thing in, like maybe you put status text as opposed to a status. So compiler can't really check for you for that. So Java 5, which was introduced back in 2005, but it still seems to be like new to a lot of people for whatever reason, introduced the concept called generics, right? Where basically you are boxing what can go into this list. So by saying it's going to be a list of status, that means that only and only Twitter status can go into this list. You can't put elephants or locomotives or anything like that, right? It's got to be a Twitter status, right? Everything else is going to cause a compile time error, right? So it's just a much better way to do things. So that's what you want to do there. Cool. So now that we have the list, we need to figure out how to query the database. Well, there is something called db.query, right? So just type in db. Actually, we should first get a db. So db helper.get readable database, right? And now you can say db.query. And that's going to give you one long method. Everyone there? So db.query says, okay, what's the table name that you want to get? I'm gonna say it's gonna be table. Because we already have that. What columns do we want? Well, if you put null, it's gonna give you all the columns. Selection and selection args if you're doing a where statement, like where ID equals 47 or something like that. We're not, so I'm gonna put null and null for that. Group by, do you guys know what group by is in SQL? Some of you do? Okay. I don't, so I'm gonna put null. Having, you guys know what having is? Alright. Usually people don't know what I'm talking about. I just put null, null, null. So essentially, this is equivalent to select star from status. Yeah.
Can you order by time?
Yeah, we could order by creating that. Sure, we could say order by, and then you put, sorry, we don't need order by, we just need the column created at, but we want it descending. Okay. So yes, we can do that. Just make sure, don't forget this little space here, because otherwise it's going to be order by created at desk, and it's going to get confused, right? So remember to put that there. So far, so good? Okay. So, so now that we have, what does this DB query do? So this is equivalent of select star from status order by this, created at descending. Now, what it actually returns is something called a cursor. Okay, so we actually get something called cursor. So you get an object called cursor. Okay. What cursor is an iterator. So we can now iterate over this cursor. Okay. So basically what we can do is we can do cursor dot move to first. Okay, and then we can do while, or we can do a do while. Let me think about this. Actually, let's do while cursor move to next. That should actually not skip. Move to next. It should position the first. So this method will return false if the cursor already passed the last entry. Move the cursor to the next row. Whether moves. Okay, yeah. So this should be fine. So let's do while this. We're now iterating over all the instances of the data. So essentially, what a cursor is going to correspond to is a one-line item, one record in the database, right? Make sense? So a cursor basically points to the entire blob of data, but you iterate when you say move to next, move to next, move to next. You're basically going to next row. So it's done this way, so you can deal with infinite amounts of data, right? Because it's just a pointer to some possibly very large data set, right? Now, once we are inside of this this thing, what we can do is we need to create a new status, okay? And from this cursor, right? So we're gonna create a new status from a cursor. So and remember, cursor corresponds to a unit of something from a database. Now I could what I could do is I could do it all in here, but it may be cleaner if we do a little private method here, just to kind of like do a helper. So I'll create a little private status from cursor. So this is going to extract, right? So this is going to extract imports. I got that. So basically, we need to basically return. Let's see, user. Yeah, there's a JSON approach as well. Well, that kind of sucks that I can't create an empty cursor. let's take a look at this. So status. There is no constructor. And there is no factory method. Let me see what the best approach is. User text. So this was the documentation says it's a user ID and created at, and I don't have a sets. Okay. Okay. So let me see. This actually got deprecated. So let's think about this. We want to return. You know what? Let's just do this. Let's just return a query here. Let's do it like this. We're not gonna do the cursor. We're gonna just return a cursor here. I'm gonna redesign this. You can take this one out. Okay. Let's just do this. We're gonna return cursor here. Keep it simpler. And then we're gonna do that logic in the UI. So just keep the all right, because we can't do the I'm gonna return. We can't create a cursor. We can only get it directly from the service, unfortunately. So it's fine. We're just not gonna deal internally with statuses. We're gonna deal with cursors. So we're gonna basically open up the database for reading, query it, and return the cursor. Done. Good. Now in timeline activity, we're gonna get that cursor and define cursor here. Cursor. So cursor is gonna be, we need to get status data, right? So Yamba app, okay, and then get application, right? Dot status data dot query. That gets us a cursor. So this is our view. This is our output. This is our data. Right? Now what we want to do is we want to populate the output with our data. Okay? So to do that, we can iterate over the cursor here. What I was going to do on that one and return a nice list, I'm just going to do it here instead. So I'll say while cursor move to next, right? We're going to do something. So this is now iterating over that data. So far so good? So what we can do is we have this text out. That's just a text output. What we can do is we can append to it. We can do text out dot append and then some kind of text, right? Now that text could be something of this nature. String dot format, and let's just say who said what. %s column space %s. Right. So within that, I now need to figure out who said what. Let me just to try to less confuse you. I'm just going to define the variables here: string user, right, and string text, right. So that's who said what. So what's going to go here is going to be user comma text, right, something like that. Make sense? Now the question is, how do we get the user and how do we get text? Well, remember that that cursor at one point is actually represents the row of data. So if I go to my SQLite and I do select star, so select star from status. Okay, this is the entire cursor points to this entire blob of data, the entire table dump, right? One particular during one particular iteration through that, cursor points to one particular row. So a particular row may look like this. This is ID, this is timestamp, this is the username, this is the actual text of the message. Make sense? So now to get the username, this guy here, that's basically 0, 1, 2. That's a second item, right? So I could do something like this: cursor dot get string at column 2. And for text, I could say cursor dot get string for column 3. Yeah, so I'm getting to that, yeah. Now, the problem with this approach 2 and 3 is that it's extremely unlegible, right? It doesn't mean anything to anyone. It's really easy to mess things up. If you ever change your database schema, you got to remember to change this, and it's just a poor programming. So a better approach would be to do something like this: cursor dot get column name, get column index for column name, and then the column name would be status data dot column user, right? And then this would be, this would be column index for column name, status data dot column text. Right, and presumably those are constants, so we can do that outside of the loop and so forth, right? But yeah, I know this is not optimal, and these kinds of things could be done outside of the loop, and this can be done outside the loop. But I don't really care about that too much. It just, for legibility, I'll just leave it like this for now. And we're gonna rip this apart anyway, but for now it's fine. So basically, we are getting our UI, right? We're getting our data, and then we're iterating over our data and getting the username and the user text piece and appending it to our UI, right? That's it. So if I run this, what's that? I may want to do like a \n here so that it actually doesn't all glue on the same line. So if I run this, okay, I go to menu, timeline, there's the dump, right? Got it? So we got our data. Woohoo! This is the only new thing in status activity.
No, status data.
Status data was just basically doing returning this. We just had this method called query.
Right, so I have some full.
Isn't an automatic scrolling the text between devices?
So what are the problems with this right now? Yeah, for one, you can't scroll. So I mean, it's good for the first 8.5 messages or so. So you can't really, one way to solve this problem would be to just print everything in a smaller font.
But in the emulator, I can actually use the mouse to scroll through the text field.
You can't. You can't scroll. No. Well, okay, I'll take a look at that. So there are problems. There are problems with this one, right? So we're gonna solve them next. Okay. But first we wanted to do the simplest thing possible. Just dump the data, iterate over it, and dump it. Right? Bam, bam. That's what happens, right? Cool. All right. Any questions or comments so far?